and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your hosts, Buddy Sotello, Esquire, Evan Ginzburg, Mike Lano, and very special guest tonight, Benny Scala. Thank you so much for being part of tonight's festivities. We'll be adding in Marc Madison later on this evening. So lots to talk about this week. Not all of it good news, which is, it seems like every week we have a common theme with Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast, and that's the death of somebody that meant something to us. And this week, certainly for myself and Mike Lano, the passing of Doug Anderson was a significant event in both of our lives because we did know Doug pretty well. And for those who aren't that familiar with Doug Anderson, I understand maybe you wouldn't, he was the father of Cheerleader Melissa, or Raisha Saeed, who is a lot more familiar, I think, to the general audiences. She was a big part of the Awesome Kong feud that happened in TNA, in Total Nonstop Action, a few years ago. And Melissa herself has been one of the premier female wrestlers, not just on the West Coast, but I think internationally, and amazing to work with, and a tremendous professional. And she learned a lot of how to be who she was through her father, who was an ex-policeman and then kind of a silent partner of All Pro Wrestling for a number of years until basically the death of Roland Alexander. Mike, do you want to have something to say about Doug?
No, I knew Doug for over 35 years. He was a wrestler. He teamed with his brother, was Bill Anderson, who I brought to the show many times. Evan's a longtime friend of Billy Anderson. And he actually, Melissa corrected me. I'd heard, because Evan told me about Hippie Jim Ryan, and it took me a while. Then I started digging up photos of him. I'll get to him in a second. And I forget who told me about Doug Anderson, but then I asked Melissa and her husband, Jason Dedrich, if this was true. And she said yes. And I mentioned this stuff. He helped train her for the ring, as did Billy and I believe Jesse Anderson too at EWF. And he was working behind the scenes where she was simply valeting and taking bumps for the Ballard twins while she was living with one of the Ballards as boyfriend-girlfriend. And then around 2001, after the King of the Indies thing, they came up together. But she said that was a work, and Roland promised him he'd have part of the company, but nothing ever materialized from it. And so within a year or two, year and a half, he kind of got bored with the whole thing and went up to the Washington State area, where he did a lot of charitable work for animals and people, and was out of wrestling at that point. But he had promoted here and there. He'd done some heel managing. He'd done a lot of things. He was a super nice guy. Before the shows would start, I'd get there about 4 hours early and hang with him in Roland's room at the APW place in Hayward, California, or we'd talk history outside if it was hot, like it is now all over the country. And just really nice. So the service was today up, I think it's a suburb outside of Seattle. He sent me all the details, which I then sent to Meltzer, Wade Keller, Dave Scheer, Mike Johnson, Japan, PWI, pretty much everybody. And Dan Murphy, who I knew, when she and Jason Dedrich, who she met, he was helping promote some small towns, etc., for APW. Anyway, she married him when she moved up to Northern California. Her career took off, and most recently she was wrestling and booking American Talent into the Stardom promotion, which was the original one for Rossi Ogawa was the guy who came from All Japan Women. He was the brain of All Japan Women, my boss there when I would go and photograph and write for them. And then he formed Stardom, and most of the Japanese female talent in WWE and NXT now are all from that promotion that they pocketed, like Io Shirai, etc. Hippie Jim Ryan, very briefly, was, if there was ever a hobo in wrestling, as a wrestling fan, it was this gentleman from about 63 on. I've emailed Les Thatcher and some other guys, territory wrestlers, And this guy would hitchhike or jump onto trains like an actual hobo from his North Carolina home. Like in 73 and 74, he came out to L.A., he claimed he hitchhiked the whole way like 7-8 times when we had
that's one way to save on travel expenses.
Yeah.
Some other friends like Dave Brzezinski, who was a co-founder with Jeff Walton and Tom Burke and Diane Devine at WFIA, he said fondly, not in a bad way, because everybody loved Jim Ryan, who long hair, long beard. So Evan tells me about his death, and I start digging up photos, and I go, geez, that's the guy. He's sitting there with Johnny Legend. Two guys, long hair, long beard, 73, 74. And so Dave Brzezinski goes, yeah, pretty much like a ton of WFIAs. He always snuck in without paying for the banquet. But he said, I would forgive all of that to have him back, because this guy was like a real historian. He knew dates and all of this stuff, like some of us, with some of the Supreme guys being like Tom Burke, who I want to have on the show soon. But he could remember dates, really obscure names who wrestled for just a couple of weeks in like territories like Alabama, Tennessee, and stuff. So our hats are off, and we send, our love to the families of these folks. So Hippie Jim was 72, and I don't even think Doug Anderson was quite that old. He might have been about 69. Wow. But really good guys. And
it seems like every week we're doing some kind of memorial. And let me just say this quickly before we bring Benny on. There's a zillion podcasts, there's a zillion websites in wrestling, and the vast majority of them will devote 99% of their content to Raw, SmackDown, AEW. How about acknowledging some of these people, the historians, the authors, the indie guys, the less well-known legends who pass? It's a community. It's a community, and we always try to acknowledge our own. And I think it's the right thing to do. And even if you don't know who these guys are, and this week, these were Russell and Mike's friends, not mine. I didn't, but it's nice to learn about them and know about their accomplishments and their history. So acknowledge people in our community. That's our message. The 5,000 word, ode to a meaningless roar that everybody does. It's just pablum. You can wipe your ass with it. It's disposable.
Is somebody's life. This was somebody's life here. Exactly. Somebody that devoted something to the business. And hey, without Doug Anderson, without Cheerleader Melissa, really has been an influential woman wrestler in the history of modern wrestling. I think there's no doubt about that. She's influenced a lot of other ladies to get involved in wrestling. They watched her in the 2000s.
The trainer at NXT, she was under consideration. It went to Sarah D'Amato, who had started in APW, then went to Iron, and of course all that career with her then boyfriend Claudio Castagnoli, Cesaro, in Ring of Honor, where she wrestled and blew everyone away. But it could have been Melissa Anderson, running that, and I wish it was the two of them. But
incredible professional, and we wouldn't have had her in the field without Doug Anderson's contribution. So let's bring on Benny here. He's been patient enough, and I know he has plenty to tell us. So why don't we bring Benny on and have him?
Benny, tell us about that backdrop first of all.
That's the logo for Dan and Benny in the Ring, which is our podcast, myself and Dan Sebastiano, and we really try to pay homage to the old school wrestlers. And I know that we're going to talk about some recent passings, and besides the recent passings, there's so many of these guys that have health issues right now. Paul Orndorff and several others that have health issues. That
Terry Funk,
right? And I mean, these guys, to me, and I told a friend, I said, these guys are national treasures, as far as wrestling goes.
International treasures.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, and they have like hundreds and thousands of great stories, of life on the road. And, when they go, those stories go with them. And I think we have to honor these people while they're still with us.
we've tried, but a lot of our shows, unfortunately, are posthumous ones, where we have to give a tribute to them after the fact,
Right.
because a lot of times we're stunned with how early some of these folks leave us. I mean, we just had. I mean, Doug wasn't very old, and a couple other weeks.
New Jack was young. Jerome
New
Young.
Jack was 58. Del Wilkes, I think, was 59.
59.
Melissa
Animal.
Coates was 50.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute. Back in the day, some of these legends like Orndorff, they were wrestling 300 plus nights a year, shuttled like farm animals from town to town. You're not sleeping well, you're on and off planes, you're eating at the IHOP 3 a.m. This isn't conducive to longevity. I mean, the wrestlers who live to 90 plus are few and far between. They're even 80 plus is pretty rare. They're the exception to the rule. And you also have to realize, going back to the 70s, these guys wrestled in smoke-filled arenas. Thousands of people smoking. They're breathing that crap in night after night after night. And Mike will tell you, Mike has a medical background, I don't. Those chair shots to the head night after night are not conducive to a healthy end.
Let me just briefly do the Terry Funk as quickly as I can, because I talk to him or call him. I had up until about 6 weeks ago, once a week for years. I've known him since actually 68. As I told, and I've tried to stay out of this, but since his wife Vicky, and they've been married forever, passed a little over 2 years ago, he wasn't the same at all. They had to get rid of the ranch. Prior to her passing, they moved into a much smaller home, a gated community. But anyway, I've been in contact with Don Morocco for about 6-7 weeks. Out of the blue, started talking to him regularly because I was doing a text piece on him. He did not tell me. I didn't even know he had a podcast, a magnificent podcast that he does in Hawaii, Oahu. But on Monday, he has Scott Casey on, and Scott went to go visit Terry at the assisted living place that his daughter put him into, the daughter that lives closest to him, just not in Amarillo. She doesn't live in Amarillo. So apparently the house that he last had with Vicky, after they had to sell the Double Cross Ranch that I got to stay at, sold. He's in an assisted living place. And Scott Casey kind of spilled the beans that a lot of us have sort of been quietly talking behind the scenes, but not publicly, that he's got dementia. And I'd noticed, I think I told you, there was a lot of incidents of things. And like a year ago, I was supposed to bring him on when I had one of the last segments of a COVID con with Abby. And then his daughter said, please don't. We don't want to put him in a live situation where he might embarrass himself or get forgetful and blah, blah, blah. Because stacks of mail unopened were by the door. I mean, tons of mail. And some of these promoters didn't know, he might not have been mentally internalizing this stuff. They'd ask if he could make a fan fest or, convention or signings. And then they would send him, a check along with plane tickets, sat unopened. And then he didn't show up. And some of these promoters started bad-mouthing him. It wasn't Terry's fault. So she started coming in, bringing him groceries, taking his mail, and just sifting out the bills and paying it. There were some other things, him asking a ton of us who called, like Chris Cruz, myself, a friend of Dan Murphy who retired from PWI, one of my cohorts there, who called him constantly. We were all being told by Terry, I've got this hernia, give me a doctor, some recommendations. I don't trust the hernia guys here. Well, he'd been saying that he had that hernia, his daughter said, operate on like 7 years ago. Nothing wrong with him, but he was like fixated on it. So Scott Casey said he was in pretty bad shape. And then everybody was talking about that Tuesday. It was,
Yeah, no, a lot of wrestlers don't meet with pleasant endings. And
then Tommy Dreamer, though, Wednesday, after he heard all this, he wanted to protect Terry and started the show by saying, hey, I called him on the phone last week on his birthday and then yesterday, and he sounds okay to me. So, a lot of us saw the same thing with Dory Jr. In Vegas 2 years ago. He just kind of was out of it and repetitive, and it was very depressing. So that's kind of what we have. And those chair shots, Evan is right. They were cumulative. They had no idea about any of that stuff. Only good thing, and I'm going to shut up here, is President Biden is trying to put through a law, surprisingly, that Andrew Yang was all over, in doing away with this independent contract bullshit, which will help at least today's wrestlers. It may never, pass because, big rich corporations like WWE, et cetera, are going to try to fight it. And you heard the thing that Linda McMahon accompanied Trump to the press conference of him making all this noise about suing Facebook and Twitter and blah, blah, blah. So they're still in it. So you can bet, the McMahon family, I'm sure they want to protect their money, but I'm just, saying them off the top of my head. I would guess they and many other big corporations are going to try to fight this declassifying of independent contractors because, these talents that are stuck with like 90 days no competes where they can't work, they can't go to some other out.
One of the things that I want to hear what Benny's thoughts are, but with the NCAA ruling, I don't know if you've kept up on what happened with the NCAA just a couple weeks ago, where they've now said that the individuals have rights over their likenesses and their names, and that they aren't just under the property of the NCAA body, that you have to make individual contracts with all these athletes that were considered permanent rookie. They weren't allowed to collect.
The schools make money and the kids don't.
And the NCAA didn't have to give them any portion of it. Well, now they have to. So I wonder if that's going to be an effect on the WWE and the way it treats its independent contractors, if they truly are independent contractors. What do you think, Benny?
I have never understood that because they can't. I mean, if they're wrestling for WWE, they can't make a shot for TNA or Ring of Honor. I mean, why aren't they employees? What about them is not employee-like? I mean, they're totally beholden to the WWE.
Because they're entertainers, and somehow entertainers magically puts them in a spot where they can be considered essential employees enough to work during the COVID lockdown in Florida, but not employees when it comes to having any benefits or any kind of legal status therein. So that I'll never be able to explain.
The independent contractor argument, which is what they want to classify them as, opposed to semi or permanent employees. So they don't have to pay the benefits. Sometimes they're stuck paying for their hotel, their hospitalization, all of that junk.
And employees don't get their stuff thrown into a trash bag with electrical tape wrapped around it and told goodbye. I mean, that's certainly not a standard. Although,
well, employees, you got to do it yourself when you have your own plastic bag when you're an employee.
Yeah, don't they escort you out of the office?
After you just pack your own crap into a plastic bag. So, I guess. Oh, I thought that was kind of low class what they did with Mickey James.
They've done that for years. They claim the guy that was canned when Johnny Ace came back, John Laurinaitis. He claimed, oh no, it wasn't just Mickey. That's just been our thing. They leave anything behind, we put it in a black baggy, still trashy and crappy. It's not very professional, but they claim they've done that for years, well prior to the Mickey James thing. She just went public, and thank goodness she did, because it's sickening.
It is.
So on a positive note, where do you guys all rank Terry Funk among the all-time greats? I would say arguably top 5, easily top 10 of all time.
I was going to say it's in the 5 to 10 range, probably, for me. I wouldn't put him completely at the very top, mainly because, it's hard to argue against his talent, so I'm not gonna dissuade those. But I think maybe on the marketability side, if that has something to do with the greatness of your championship, he probably wasn't as marketable as some of the other ones that you might put in that very top 5. But as far as his resume goes, can't argue with that.
What do you think, Benny?
I think his legacy is just cut. I mean, I totally agree. Definitely top 10. I think he was only, about 14 months as NWA champion, but I believe that was his own doing because he just didn't really want to do the travel. I think if he was, a 3 or 4 year NWA champion, maybe you could even say top 5.
In the ring, he was as great as anybody.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I saw Terry Funk wrestle live, Sabu twice, Cactus Jack. I was there for the I Quit match with Ric Flair in Baltimore. It was unbelievable. And he was no kid then. You could say he was past his prime then, and it was unbelievable, late 80s. So
Mick, it was middle-aged and crazy when he had the thing with Flair. When he turned on Flair after Flair finally took the strap from Steamboat, and then he pile drove him on that table, and that set up the Funk Flair. I got to shoot him, though, I'll be brief, in the 70s during his NWA title reign against a ton of opponents, against Harley, him and Dory teaming up against Briscoe and Kiniski at heel, Terry's title defenses against guys like Lonnie Main and Morocco, speaking of Morocco, and Chavo Guerrero and many others at the Olympic and stuff. I put him above Flair in terms of match quality because he was so versatile. He could work with anyone like Flair could, but he could make it even more entertaining because Flair is very repetitive with his cachet of moves. Plus, look at the interview skills of Funk, second to nobody. So he's got to be on that Mount Rushmore. I put him in the top 4, not putting him in like a category with Jack Briscoe, real athletic hooker, maybe not a hooker shooter like Thez was, but just slightly below that. Perhaps the most entertaining guy in the 70s and 80s on through all the ECW stuff. He can work with anybody. If you can work with Abby and then work with Billy Robinson in Japan, come on.
Mike will tell you that when we did our old show, Legends Radio, whenever we interviewed the legends, they would say that the greatest of all time was either Ray Stevens or Buddy Rogers, right, Mike? One after another. They always said Ray Stevens and Buddy Rogers, but they revered Terry Funk. They revered Ivan Koloff. They revered Killer Kowalski. These were the names that always came up. Just unbelievable respect, but
he also has as much of a following in Japan as he has here in the United States.
Retirement's Japan. He's a god over there, just slightly below Thez and Carl Gotch. Terry Funk.
Yeah, I think he'd be rated. I'd have maybe rated 7th in the United States, maybe like a top 3 or 4 in Japan.
So we can all agree Terry Funk is top 10, right? No argument.
At least.
Okay. Okay.
I don't have a problem with that.
So out of thousands upon thousands of wrestlers, that's high praise. That's high praise.
Well, he gave his whole life.
He made it believable, really, truly.
He really did give his entire life to wrestling. You can't. Terry didn't do anything else. He didn't do acting, and he didn't do rap music, and he didn't do any kind of
Paradise Alley. He was the great heel foil.
Oh, that's right.
Paradise Alley. He was tremendous. He was good. He was on the pilot. He did some pilot with Piper. He did another one with Jesse Ventura. He was he was great. He was the guy that introduced all of the wrestlers that would do part-time acting, like Piper and Hogan, to that place in the Valley by Studio City, where they would all get their part-time rentals. And there was food there. And it was a complex that actors could rent short or long term. And Terry Funk discovered that place and turned on all of these wrestlers. You asked Jesse Ventura.
Let's hope we don't have to do a tribute show to him too soon. This is, unfortunate. Hopefully not foreshadowing ourselves.
Well, he has his good days too. Like 2 months ago, we talked to him. He was fine. So he can go in and out. The short term is usually gone. But and then sometimes, like Tommy said, you hang up with him and he'll call you back 4 times in the same evening and you want to go over some more things. So sometimes he's good. Sometimes he sounds, fine to the untrained person, but then other times he's a little out of it.
Yeah.
So, Russ, buddy, Mark Madison says his Skype is okay now.
Okay, let me try adding him.
So meanwhile, while Buddy's doing that, Benny, plug your show. Tell us about the show.
Okay, so Dan and Benny in the Ring, like I said, we occasionally will do the pay-per-views. only to try to attract a little bit of the newer, the younger audience. But our core is old school wrestling. So we had Ron Shaw on last week, and Ron Shaw actually is credited with one of the biggest upsets in the history of wrestling when he defeated David Sammartino in 2 minutes.
What's he up to now? What's he doing?
He's retired in Florida. I think he's in North Fort Myers. So it was, ironically, we did the podcast on Tuesday night, which is right when the storm was bearing down. But we both survived it, and it didn't really hit anywhere near as as bad as we thought it would. But and the week before we had Jimmy Valiant, who you talk about an international treasure. I could have sat there all night and listened to him talk. Kind of the same way when we had you and Nikita doing the What If podcast about Billy Graham versus Backlund. That could have went on for a day, and I still wouldn't have been bored. Just talking about that stuff. We're talking about stuff that happened in 1978, 43 years ago, and we can, you guys still could argue about it with passion, respectfully, but with passion.
Oh yeah, I love Nikita, and I also love the masked medic. He's joined us, Marc Madison. How are you, Marc?
Well, I figured I'd socially distance, even in a virtual call. So
Yeah, I've had my shot, so you don't need your mask.
Same here.
I'm partially vaccinated. So
where are you, Mark? Are you in Canada?
I'm in Canada. Yeah, in between houses, as Evan knows.
Well, literally, it looks like you're outside.
Yeah, I'm outside. It's a beautiful night here.
What city in Canada?
It's Vaughan in Ontario. So.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Wow, you were. I guess you were probably pulling for Winnipeg against the Thunder.
Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
I was pulling for Montreal for against the Lightning. So yeah, and I'm not typically a Lightning fan or even a Canadiens fan. I'm actually a Blackhawks fan. Believe that.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
Let me just quickly address this. Benny is wearing a Pro Wrestling Stories shirt, and Mark is from Pro Wrestling Post, and those are the two websites that I contribute to out of thousands, because I have nothing but respect for these two websites. So Mark, tell us about Pro Wrestling Post.
Pro Wrestling Post actually was inspired and actually encouraged by a common friend, JP Zarka, who I adore and talk to on the regular. And from interviews that I had done many years ago, actually, it was upon JP's encouragement to create my own site. And with his support, we created a name. He helped really with the early foundation of it. And the idea is to really embrace independent wrestling. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, it's really taken a hit. When I came on Evan's show, gosh, was it 2 years ago, Evan?
Approximately, yeah.
Something like that. So when we spoke, it was thriving. We were talking about wrestling in Germany and parts of the Japan and the UK, and then lots of things hit, and you almost have to reassess. I would love to. I'm trying to avoid having the spotlight behind me. I really had to kind of reassess, how do we try to move forward, still stay relevant. I would love to be able to dive feet first back into independent wrestling if I could get the coverage on sort of the mainstream, but not Vince's like babies primarily. So I can really dig deeper into exploring the talent that's emerging really in GCW and Black Label Pro and wonderful independent promotions along the East and West Coast in the US, and then go back into diving into wrestling in Germany. And we have some wonderful coverage in Japan, but there's so many different areas that we could explore that I need the support to do that. So that's kind of where I am right now. But it's a combination of looking at historical reference and putting dates to things, really significant things, and then also getting touching pieces like Evan recently did for us on Melissa Coates, and really blending both of those together. And we have wrestlers that are bloggers for us, and they give us a really personal touch and a perspective on their experiences. So I should really try to kind of capture all of that And if I do the best I can curating it, definitely with support, but that's definitely what Pro Wrestling Post is right now. What does the future hold? I'm not sure. I'm really I'm still reassessing. I think that's what's important, is how do we continue to grow? Well, I really want to put a spotlight on independent wrestling today and international wrestling as a whole. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we call ourselves pro wrestling and we don't cover everything and anything that has to do with it. So, but I don't want to get stuck in the news, which if you're not on it, on top of it, you're behind. But I think there's a place for us. It's just, where is that place? Where's the longevity? Where can we see us in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line?
Mark, I was curious. We had a promoter on the other week from Florida who said there's 68 or 69 different indie promotions just in Florida. And here's my question. What percentage of indie wrestlers are actually going to quote unquote make it? Get to WWE, New Japan, AEW or whatnot. Would you say even 5%? I mean, what's your guess?
I would say anywhere from 3 to 5%. And then from those that make it, how long, or they even talk about a cup of coffee. I'm not even sure if they're served the cup. Because if you're stuck in a performance center, which is really, everybody talks that they don't want to be there, but if the opportunity presented themselves, it's the first place they'd want to go. But you can really be successful if we're looking at an independent contractor, really building a name for yourself on your own. And what does that look like? Well, you control the narrative. You're the one. I'm talking in cliche a little bit, but you should be able to wrestle where and when you want, at a schedule and a price that you're worth, and then people will follow that. But I don't know if that really is best for them, Evan. I mean, they know what's going to work for them and their family. I don't know if that's best. If that's the dream and you pursue it, all the power to you. But understand that, like anybody that tries to excel and make it to the National Hockey League or Major League Baseball, parents invest a lot of money, and just for the success rate in anything, it's got to be small. So unless you're willing to do all those things, I mean, we've all seen documentaries where they've talked about the road stories of getting paid $50 and driving 24 hours and not making ends meet. And so is it worth it? It's got to be their call. It's not my place to say whether or not they will or won't make it, but I think the percentage is so small that be realistic with yourself. If this is something that you're passionate about, how can you still take the energy that you want to bring to the ring and your character and develop it, but control it? Well, pursue the independence. Go to the UK, go to Germany, go to Mexico.
So how many guys are out there like a Chris Jericho back in the day or an Eddie Guerrero back in the day who can make a living without being under contract to someone, go to Japan, go to England, go to Mexico? How many of these guys actually exist now? I'm asking all you guys. This is
fewer, because look at Davey Richards. He was going to go back to try to get medical school degree, which Shane Douglas used to lie and say he could just go with his MCAT scores and go back anytime he wanted to, which never happened. Davey did, but he couldn't make enough money, so now he's working, starting back up with Court Bauer's MLW. Well, Shotzi Blackheart, we were just talking, Mark, about contractors I haven't ever talked to in the flesh, so to speak. But we were talking about Biden. President Biden here is actually taking on both the independent contractor status thing and covenants not to compete. Specifically the WWE's 90-day, you can't compete for somebody else type of thing. Probably won't pass with the Republicans and conservatives, but we'll see. But you take Shotzi Blackheart. Actually, from an indie standpoint or shows, I've got a lot of very brief news. There's a brand new promotion that Jacob Fatu, Sam Fatu, Tonga Kid's son, has started, and Russ may not even know about this, called West Coast Pro Wrestling. They had a
I just read about it.
San Francisco.
So they got
Getting guys like Alex Hammerstone in from MLW, but also I'm going to be going and shooting with 2 masks on the New Japan thing at a small venue that's part of the LA Coliseum, August 16th. So we'll have that, and I would like to try to make this West Coast Pro Wrestling. But there's another group, maybe Russ, you haven't heard of this, UGWA in San Jose. I think that's some friends of Woody Farmers and Daniel Garcia. So there's a lot of cool stuff. Shotzi Blackheart, I was just going to say very briefly, I shot her debut matches. She started with the green hair. She's a Filipina American, which, is difficult. It was difficult for her. She worked all these West Coast indies for everybody, from BTW to APW for a long time, all this stuff. Then she did Shimmer and Shine. She went to Performance Center. Last night she's was Tegan Knox on the SmackDown roster because of all the injuries and firings. So now she's in the big time on WWE's best show, not NXT, which is their best show, but at least between crappy Raw and great SmackDown. So you can make it. But she was living that way for probably the last 9-10 years, calling her own shots, doing a Japan gig here and there for Stardom.
Then she did some work for Gabe Sapolsky and Evolve, and
yeah, a lot of guys came through Evolve. The guy that's doing the Prince of Africa gimmick, I don't know why I can't think of his name now. I used to see ACH in there. Joey Ryan, well, he's done with wrestling now, but he was in there a bunch. And
Anna?
Female wrestlers.
Is that Anna and Ring of Honor? Part of that? Prince Nana?
Yeah. What happened to Prince and Fred Yehai? He's in doing all his own shots. He's all over the place. I thought he was terrific. I first saw him on some tiny Florida indies before he started doing babyface stuff for MLW. Now he's a heel there.
I often get confused between Fred Yehi and Jonathan Grisham, just the styles.
Jonathan Grisham is so incredible. He came out, did a bunch of West Coast dates, and had matches with Dragon Lee and Teton from CMLL. That guy is off the charts. I've told him to his face what he does as artwork. I'm stealing those lines from Evan when he tells other wrestlers that, but it's true. He is just something else for a guy that size to be able to do all that incredible stuff, flying and strongman stuff, and he's, 5'5" tops. He's amazing. Amazing.
I just did a piece for Pro Wrestling Post about IWW, Imperial World Wrestling, and for those who don't know them, they mix hip hop and wrestling. So before the show, they have rappers and dance crews, and they get the crowd warmed up that way. So it used to be rock and wrestling, now it's hip hop and wrestling. So it's something different. They have some quality wrestling too. I mean, it's a promotion worth looking out for.
Now, over your way, Benny, have you seen any upswell of independent feds starting to come back and starting to do more shows?
I think most of them are starting to run now. I think Evan just said there's 68 or 69 of them here. I know there was one right in Port Richey. I believe it was running tonight, but I know that, my plan is to get my butt out there and start, supporting these shows, because, I'm a huge baseball fan, and not so much Major League Baseball. I love to go to see the Dunedin Blue Jays or the Lakeland Flying Tigers, in the Florida State League, because you're seeing guys who are playing, I don't know how much, what they even make per month playing Class A baseball, but they're hungry for a shot at the big leagues. And it's no different with the indie wrestling, in my opinion. You're looking at guys who may be the future stars of tomorrow. And I'm pretty excited about, saying one day, well, yeah, I saw that guy wrestle a couple of years ago with this promotion when, he was making, $50 or $100.
I'll tell you guys a quick story. I was down at the Elks Lodge in Queens a couple of years ago, probably longer than that. I lose track of time. So who's wrestling? Bray Wyatt under his indie name. And at the time, he had just signed the WWE. So they were all saying goodbye to him. And I walk up to him and wish him luck. And next thing you know, the guy's headlining Madison Square Garden. So he went from the Elks Lodge with 75 people to the Garden. So it's a crazy business. Crazy business, yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, back in the earlier days of APW, we had, shows where we had John Cena as the prototype, Samoa Joe, Frankie Kazarian, Christopher Daniels.
They all came up with Rick Bassman's UPW. They came up
with the UPW Invasion.
Yeah, UPW. But those shows were totally different going to cover them down in Orange County. They were way different than the vibe that you would get when they would just simply bring up a troupe. But Bassman really started a ton of people, and he was at one point sort of like Puerto Rico with Quinones, a developmental for WWE, like Deep South.
And this is where I'm headed. It was like with 69 indie feds in one state alone. Isn't there some way to like unite at least a good portion of those 69 so you could have one hell of a wrestling event? Obviously you can't fit 69 wrestlers on a card, although I've seen some matches where they've tried to fit 69 wrestlers on a card.
Dennis Coraluzzo show in the late 80s and 90s.
But it would be, and I'm not certainly one to put the bell on the cat, but do you think there might be someone that tries to unify some of these so numerous feds, at least in a geographical area, to get a... Yes, you've got a point there. Mark.
Well, I wouldn't say so much in Florida, but Brett Lauderdale of GCW has taken lots of promotions, whether it's worked with New Pro or whether he's worked with New South or whether he's taken Black Label Pro and he's put together these massive shows that while they might be easily like the biggest independent promotion in the US and maybe North America, they're still collaborating with lots of these other promotions. Is somebody strong enough to spearhead that? I don't know in the Florida area if there are, but I've definitely there's ARW and Alex Reed runs that promotion. But then you got to look at, I guess, the promoters that are running it. Are there motives to put on the best possible show and be something that's long-standing, or are they looking to collaborate and build? So who amongst them is strong enough to say, we can make a lot of money if we work together? I mean, we can make money if we work on our own, but we can make more money. And who amongst those promoters is strong enough to want to do that, or capable of doing that, or has the foresight to do that? That's the question, that we should think about. That's of those that are running in the area.
Most promoters, their motivation is to put themselves through a table, book their girlfriend, their wife, their mistress, their first cousin, and their best buddies. That's basically, it's like the Little Rascals, let's put on a show. That's usually the motivation.
Let me tell you something really funny, and it involves Jericho. Prior to even APW starting, this must have been, because APW in Northern California, just bring that up, started as a school in 95, started producing shows in 96. Prior to that, the guys left over, workers from the Roy Shire Classic territory, which was called Big Time Wrestling, Alexis Smirnoff, Woody Farmer, and one of the TV jobbers, long-timer, Jerry Monty, they all put on separate shows. And we would continually, a couple of us would say, why don't you guys collaborate? Instead of drawing 50, you could draw 150 or better, because there'd be more jazz, more interest in your shows. No. They refused to do that. And they would do the stuff I would see a decade later with APW and BTW, where they would tear each other's posters down.
Yeah.
Saying, so Woody Farm and all three guys had their mistresses help them run the locker room. They knew nothing about wrestling. So
I'm not making this up.
I'm not making this up. Chris Jericho comes in. He had just worked for Tenru's group. He was on his way to Mexico, and he had a layover. And so he was asked, I forget how it came about. I could ask him. For Woody Farmer, he worked as TV, cable access, 3 matches. And Woody Farmer's mistress goes up to the locker room and said, oh, you did all these things wrong in this match. You really sucked. Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. And he just laid into her. And he said, I worked Japan, Mexico, Europe. He just effing laid into her and put her in her place. And, and I think he walked out of there. he was done with the 3 matches he'd agreed to do as a favor to Woody Farmer. And then I would see him when I'd go over to Japan with Ultimo Dragon or, quite a few other guys. He was in a tag match with Mark Michaels and Jannetty teaming with Naoki Sano on a Tenryu show. So look at him now, king of the world. But he had his Smoky Mountain days when not a lot of pay, but a lot of prestige, teaming with Lance Storm, also out of the Stu Hart dungeon as he was from. But yeah, these mistresses and all this stuff. So sometimes I think people are more reasonable now. Like Marcus is saying, in Florida, people are a little more, because these are non-wrestler people. These are more, I don't know what today's indie promoters, they're a whole cachet of different folks. They can be business guys, they can be tech geeks, music guys.
Money marks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Benny, tell us about Pro Wrestling Stories. I know you're proud of them as well.
Absolutely. I started writing for them, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago. I always joke around about my great pal Javier Oist. I always have to give him a plug, and I always compare myself to him. And I've often said that I am the Red Klotz to his, and he's Meadowlark Lemon. And for Russell, buddy, I'm actually, he's Johnny Bench, and I'm going to use an old Giants reference. I'm Jack Hyatt.
Oh wow, I should be the Jack Hyatt,
or Bob Barton maybe, or or Dick Dietz maybe, right? But yeah, I'm catching up. I have 11 posted articles. I have a couple more in the hopper. I just had Showdown at Shea, describing the trilogy at Shea Stadium in 1972, 76, and 80. I have one that should be coming out shortly about, I call it The Eyes Have It. And it's a story about, how the human eye is used in professional wrestling. I used the fireball incident with Jim Cornette and Ronnie Garvin. And when Tanaka and Fuji used Salt and Pedro and Bruno to get them to fight each other, things like that. So it's a great website. I believe they get about 2 million hits per month. Evan, I think I just read your Melissa Coates story on there today, which was really, really good.
Thank you.
Very, very good. And you can find anything there pretty much, whatever you want. And the good thing is, if it's not on there, you can write about it. And JP is great. I can't say enough good things about JP Zorka.
So Benny, this came up online a few days ago. I said that, and I was at 2 of the 3 Shea cards. I wasn't there for Pedro and Bruno. I was there for Bruno and Hansen and Bruno and Zbyszko. I said to people that the vast majority of outdoor shows that I saw were disappointing. I said the ring was like on second base and you felt out of it, or at the pitcher's mound or whatnot. And even Ring of Honor, they brought in Okada and Nakamura. They brought in all these great Tanahashi. They brought in all these great wrestlers. The cards themselves were not great wrestling cards. I mean, the vast amount of matches were kind of forgettable. So what is it about outdoor cards that are not conducive to a great? And also TNA. I went to 2 or 3 TNA shows, and it was like a 2-hour show with a 40-minute intermission to sell gimmicks. I was so disappointed. What's your take on that, Benny?
I don't know. I use the analogy. I was never a big fan of Shea Stadium, although growing up, I probably went to about 200 Mets games, but it was only because I was actually a diehard Yankee fan. But my dad was a service manager for a Chevy dealership, and one of his customers was the PR director for the Mets. So I could get press box, whenever we wanted to go, we could sit in the press box. And my dad wasn't even a baseball fan, but if I could get to a baseball game, I don't care if it was the Mets or the Yankees, I was going. So, but Shea to me never had the allure of Yankee Stadium. And I use the analogy in my story that it was appropriately located in a place called Flushing. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't go to any of the 3. Looking at the cards, the cards really weren't that good. Each one had Bruno. That was the one common denominator, and I think that's what made it bearable. But if you look at any of the other matches, Yeah, none of them were really good. And
yeah, they were quickies. I was there for 2 out of 3, like I said, and the matches themselves, except for Bruno, they were pretty forgettable.
well, so were you there for the Ali Inoki?
Yeah, that was horrendous.
That was horrible, right?
How many live matches? There was Wepner Andre. There was
Wepner Andre was interesting, but it wasn't anything great. And Bruno and Hansen was great. What's that, Mike?
Two live matches at Shea, and then they did the feed.
No, but there were prelims.
Okay, there were other matches.
Yeah, but nothing great. You know, they had one show. Backlund and Pedro beat the Samoans, and then the next day they give the belts back. I mean, it was like meaningless.
I never could figure that out, because if it was for the titles, but you knew that if Backlund and Pedro won, that Backlund couldn't keep the title, then why was it a title match? That defies all logic.
Yeah, it was kind of pointless.
The first one, Bruno Pedro, they had no intention, even though they advertised it, they had no intention of putting on heel George Steele versus Tanaka. That was they used the thing. Oh well, the main event went to curfew. No match. But I was told by pretty much everybody, and even asked Arnie Skolin about it. There was no intention of having that match. I don't know why it was even listed. The intrigue. But remember when I brought Jack Briscoe to the show, and he, the old one that Evan and I did, Legends, and he said the big thrill for him working that show was to meet Bruno. Wasn't working, huge crowd outdoors or whatever, but it was meeting Bruno. It was the first time Bruno and Briscoe were ever on a card together.
Yeah, AEW is coming to an outdoor venue in New York. $250 ringside. I'm like, to me, they better have an all-time classic. You're going to charge $250 for a ringside ticket.
Well, we've seen SummerSlam is now got like $1,000 tickets.
Yeah, $5,000 tickets.
$5,000 for ringside, and like the main area is like around $500 to $1,000.
Let me think. They raised ticket prices for August, I think it was 7th, 1971, Tolis Blassie. I was there, as we're a lot. There was about, we don't know if it was alleged 29,000, if it was legit that at the outdoor LA Coliseum, which held 110,000 for USC and UCLA football games. But they raised the ticket prices, normally $750 adults, 5 kids, to like $10 and $8 for the outdoor Coliseum. And the matchups were all terrific. The original El Solitario against Mil Mascaras, which was off the charts. Our 2 top heel teams, Gordon McGlyeth against Shibuya and Saito. Opening match, Pat O'Connor and I think Pat Patterson and Ripper Collins. A ton of guys on there. And so the 2 longest or biggest feuds for us were the topping of that show. Blassie over Tolis, and then underneath that was Bobo over Sheik. The ticket prices were reasonable, and it was a good card. It's the only one I can think of, unless there were.
Is there anything in SummerSlam that you feel is compelling enough that you would want to pay even $50 to go see?
Joe Turco against Lee Wong.
I'm sorry?
Joe Turco against Lee Wong at SummerSlam this year.
And Lenny Solomon will be the special guest referee.
That's right. It's going to be special. That's right.
No, I mean, the pay-per-views have all blended into stuff that you would see usually, and we all know that they're going to either show you the highlights of the match the next night on Raw, and they'll repeat it again on SmackDown, so you'll get to see everything that happened twice during the week, and they're going to have rematches for the most part, because you only have so many guys to go around anyway, so they're just going to want to go with the hottest matches.
Pay-per-view. And whatever the finish was, they have it the next night. Hey, we can at least thank AEW and Impact, because their shows after the pay-per-views, they actually show footage. It's not like still images like WWE. They actually will show you what happened in the finish. So kudos to them. But
it makes watching the actual event itself kind of meaningless. If you're going to, why pay $150 or whatever, or, $1,000 to go see it when it's just going to be shown again ad infinitum during the week, the next week. There's nothing special about it. There used to be a time where, and obviously the internet was different than that. Like for WrestleMania, a lot of people didn't see a lot of the original WrestleMania. A lot of people didn't see the actual WrestleMania matches until it came out on videotape, like about 6 or 7 months later.
I sat next to Meltzer for WrestleMania 1. We were at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, a rock.
I was there too, and I didn't see you. So I'm going to say that you're lying.
Yeah.
Because we were quoted in the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Jose Mercury. They came and interviewed us, really probably just because Meltzer was there. But I was sitting next to him, so they got quotes from me on that. But we got to see the whole thing, and now...
How were you able to see it? There was smoking allowed in the Civic Auditorium at that time, and there was a wall of smoke in front of the TV monitor. I remember that in front of the screen. There was so much smoking going on, both of tobacco and all other types. It was a smoke fest in there. That's one thing I remember.
It's Thursdays on Impact's co-owned Access channel, which they've ruined. Other than Thursdays when it's wrestling, they've taken off all the cool stuff, the MMA Fridays. But starting at noon Pacific time, they'll air sequentially, and they have been for, I don't know, like the last year, all the pay-per-views that a lot of us didn't fork out for. So you can watch the entire pay-per-view when TNA was great, and they're doing it. They did it from the very first one when it was like Wednesdays, every Wednesdays, to their bigger ones, the Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe stuff. Pay-per-views in their entirety, all the interviews, nothing edited out, 4 hours of that. So if you're not watching it or you just want to rewatch a great TNA pay-per-view, do that on Thursdays on Access.
So, Mark, what can we expect from Pro Wrestling Post coming up?
We're still featuring on this days different daily features, memorable moments. Today, in particular, we looked at Akiyama versus Kobashi. What was believed to be the wrong ending. Go back to check it. I actually shared it on Dan and Benny's webpage. So if you had a chance to read it, that was probably the one feature we have today. We are looking at some different special features that are series. We're looking at a history of music. Dr. Mike Lano actually has something that is kind of archived, but it's the history of wrestling radio and where it was and where it is today. So you can get a chance to check that out. But I'd like to bring more features on independent talent. I was fortunate enough to speak to a Solomon Tupu, who was trained by Seth Rollins and Merrick Brave and the Black and Brave Academy. And while the name might get him kind of to the door, he knows that he's this emerging Samoan talent, the Samoan Hellraiser that's pushing himself forward. So more interviews with independent talent, more features on those that are part of NXT. We're also looking at where they were as opposed to where they are now and how they came to be. Those are some of the things we're looking at. We'll do some retro pieces. We have a feature that comes out every Sunday. We look at a retro view of either TNA or Impact, WCW or WWE, WWF at the time. But we're hoping to bring some more Japanese Puro retro views, and whether it was something in Noah or something that took place in All Japan. I'd love to have more women's wrestling, and if anybody's seeing this, we'd love to have more Stardom featured or more Joshi wrestling. So we've brought on some wonderful writers, very knowledgeable writers. Evan is familiar with Roy Lucier, that's part of the team as well. Did a wonderful piece recently on Cassandro, and we looked at Exotico, and with the LGBTQ plus month, Pride Month that just passed, that was something that is prominent, and we want to feature more talent with as much pride, no pun intended, of their characters and personas and where they've come from to where they are now. So we really want to highlight that and make those more moving pieces and make you want to read about them. So a little bit of more contemporary along with some history, and continue to blend the two of them. But support your indie wrestling. If you can do anything, just like Evan will often talk about, you're going to support the arts. You don't need to spend $150 to $200 for ringside tickets. $20 with your family will be a moment that you won't forget because you had something personable and you were able to connect to it because it was right in front of you. And you don't need to break the bank on entertainment. It really
Yeah,
don't.
Mark, do you think that that's going to be something that we're going to see now as people valuing like the indie stuff? Because for the last year, they've been stuck with nothing but the corporate, package of Vince McMahon AEW to some extent, and that they, yearn to see something that is different and of a different product than what you're just getting from.
I'm not going to receive any endorsement money by saying this, but I subscribe to IWTV, and that independent wrestling streaming site features a whole bunch of different promotions, and you get for $10 a month an opportunity to see a whole bunch of different promotions. And coming out of a pandemic, I'm not sure how far out of it we are, but you really need to know where are my dollars and cents going to go that I'm going to walk away with the most bang for my buck. And like you were just talking about, buddy, I think that's where people are going to have to assess, just as you put it. They're going to have to assess, do you need to be stuck in what major promotions do? And that is the beyond end. Well, no. And it doesn't make you a smark for getting to know a Tyler Black before he became Seth Rollins. It just meant you were paying attention to people as they were going through their journey. And yeah, you want to see them succeed, but you feel sad that you lost that person that you got a chance to shake hands with or see at an autograph signing right after the show. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but I think the whole point is I think people are going to have to put value on where they want their entertainment dollars to be. Streaming is and continues to be the means of how people are going to connect and watch not just wrestling, but any form of media. So as we continue to do that, that's going to be important. So let's see what the future holds. I'm hoping for the best.
Mark, let me ask you, because it's still light where you are. Do you guys, it's like when I go up to Vancouver where it doesn't get dark until 11 at night because it still looks light out, and you're probably, what are you, 10 after 10 right now at night?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sitting behind my neighbor's lamppost, so it probably looks brighter than it is. I'm getting chewed by mosquitoes. So this is really interesting. I never planned on this backdrop. It's not.
Well, we won't let you get chewed up too much longer. Evan, you sounded like you had some point you wanted to make.
Well, I just wanted Benny also to plug your show and anything else you want to plug.
Well, I did write a show. We had Jimmy Valiant on June 29th. He was a phenomenal guest, and I wrote a story. I assumed that there was a story about him on Pro Wrestling Stories. There wasn't one, so I wrote one. And but in the meantime, he liked it so much that he actually dropped it on his website. So it's on jimmyvaliant.weebly.com. It's called A Story of Handsome Jimmy. I really enjoyed writing it. He's really a great guy and a genuinely nice person. But I'm trying to broaden my horizons a little bit. I actually am in the process of writing a children's book with my son Dan.
Wow.
It's called Lila's Wish and the Magical Dish. And of course, it includes food. So because food is life.
There you go.
Wonderful. Hopefully, you'll be able to promote it on our show next time when it's getting ready to publish. So, speaking of nice guys, you guys have been really wonderful to have as guests on our show. We're pretty much right at the end of the hour. So, unless you guys have anything else you'd like to mention or how people can get a hold of you.
Well, buddy, I want to say one thing. I've been meaning to say this the last two shows, that your introduction is very Ed Sullivan-esque.
Yeah.
And when you said wrestling and everything coast to coast, instead of introducing me, I could have swore that you were going to introduce either Topo Gigio or Mom's Mabley.
That's right.
What's that, Evan? Who's the comedian that was on Ed Sullivan? I can't think of the guy's name. Young guy. He always wore a suit. He was always joked about being wealthy and having rich parents. Can't for the life of me. I can't think of the guy's name now.
You're much, much, much older than me. I don't remember. No, I'm joking.
He, oh gosh,
Miller and Derek were on it. Of course, Richard Pryor was in a suit.
No,
we're gonna need to do a Soupy Sales Ed Sullivan.
It's London Lee.
Yeah.
That's it.
London Lee.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. How can people get a hold of you guys? One more plug for both of your media sources for you guys.
So my Dan and Benny in the Ring on Facebook, Pro Wrestling Stories as far as any of my stories.
Great. And Mark?
You can reach me either independently at at the Mark Madison on Twitter or at Pro Wrestling PST on Twitter. I'm just waiting for that vowel to pop up so I can squeeze the O in for Twitter. For Instagram, it's at Pro Wrestling Post. I haven't done TikTok yet, but I'm sure my kids are going to encourage that. So that's pretty much our social media. And then we have a Facebook page on Pro Wrestling Post. Thankfully, we have a
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show this week. We'll see everyone next week. And thanks a lot, everybody. Have a safe weekend.
Night.
Take care.